brilliant race with an incredible crowd once again on Formula One's return to Mexico, and having a Mexican driver on the podium was awesome to watch, with a huge result for him, Max Verstappen, and the Red Bull team, with the points difference in the Constructors' Championship now just being a single point between those top two teams. There's lots to talk about, so here's my 5 things we learned from the Mexico City Grand Prix. Let's have a look. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. Max Verstappen's cool, calm and collected approach. We have once again seen a dominant performance from Max Verstappen in Mexico. Qualifying was a disappointment for the Red Bull team in general, but Verstappen was very quick to say that he'd rather be in P3 than in P2, given he would be on the racing line for the start of the Grand Prix. And the Mercedes cars allowed him to hold that line at the start, as Bottas moved ever so slightly to the right to allow a car's width to his left, something that he didn't need to do, but did in order to try and give Lewis Hamilton a tow. But in doing so, he basically opened the door for Max Verstappen to take the racing line, and ultimately, he was able to be more confident on the brakes, which ensured he overtook both Mercedes cars at the off. The subsequent safety car restart early on in the race was comfortable for the Dutch driver, and it certainly seemed as though he'd done his research on how best to control the restart after a safety car. And given there is that long straight, it would be crucial to manage the gap to the competitor behind, which is all he needed to do. Quite frankly, after that restart, it was job done for Max Verstappen, as he pulled an 8-second lead on Lewis Hamilton through his first stint, and really, Hamilton was more concerned with Sergio Pérez behind him. To be honest, Verstappen was in a race of his own all afternoon, as he continued to build on that lead following the pit stops. And this is what means he's well and truly deserving of a green box today. He didn't really put a foot wrong all afternoon, and once again he was operating at that level on which he was conscious of how close Perez was to Hamilton through those closing stages, and he was desperate to increase his championship lead further, and he could have even been thinking about the Constructors' Championship and how valuable a 1-2 finish could have been for the Red Bull team. In the end, it was a 16-second victory for the Dutchman, and now a further extension of his lead in the championship to 19 points. Almost that all-important race victory gap. Field spread was a real issue. The Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez poses a unique challenge for the Formula One teams. The circuit is at the highest altitude of any on the calendar, and as such there are issues with overheating, and the teams have to go for the maximum downforce setup in order to keep the cars planted at this altitude. And it's because of this that the Alpine team amended their engine cover to add in a slot to allow for additional cooling, as all of the teams search for ways to protect their engines. And in the race, where you have cars following closely, there are a few particular issues. The cars overheat very quickly if running in the wake of a car ahead of them, and given the air density is so low, the engines basically struggle to breathe, and so the drivers are forced to drop back and ensure they can cool the cars. This of course means that track position is crucial, and being the lead car is so important out of turn 2 as it allows you to control the race and, more importantly, your car temperatures throughout the Grand Prix. This culminated in the leaders lapping the back markers within just 21 laps of the 71 lap race, and this would have been sooner if it wasn't for the 4 or so laps we saw behind the safety car. To have that kind of field spread in such a short space of time is very frustrating to see, especially when we had such a potentially exciting Grand Prix on our hands with 2x2 at the front with the top 2 teams. It just meant that on-track overtakes tend to be very difficult, and that's despite the incredibly long start-finish straight, which even with DRS you need a huge speed differential to make the move stick. You just have to look at how frustrated Valtteri Bottas was when trying to pass Daniel Ricciardo to see how difficult it could be after he was stuck behind for almost 40 laps. And ultimately he needed the Australian driver to dive into the pits in order to help him get past. So it's got to be a red box for the field spread at this circuit. I know there isn't much that could be done given the engine cooling requirements, but it's certainly a frustration for me at this Grand Prix. Before I get into the next box, I want to take a moment to ask you to consider subscribing to Behind the Drive. We're aiming to get to 25,000 subscribers by the end of the season, so if you haven't already done so, then please hit the subscribe button. Thanks. Pierre Gasly has an excellent weekend once again. Next up, I want to give a green box to Pierre Gasly. The French driver has had an excellent season for AlphaTauri and has really led the charge for that team in their fight for 5th in the Constructors' Championship this season, as he scored the vast majority of points for that AlphaTauri team. In that fight for 5th, Alpine and AlphaTauri are now level on points for the year, and these performances have been delivered through consistency across this season. with the Frenchman finishing in the top 6 on 7 occasions so far this year. He's done an excellent job all year, and today in Mexico it was no exception for Pierre Gasly. It started with a very strong performance in qualifying to put his car in P5, or the best of the rest spot on the grid. This was helped with a very strong performance from his teammate, Yuki Tsunoda, who has tended to struggle all year, but with the Japanese driver taking an engine penalty, he ensured he got through to Q3 to support the Frenchman with a crucial slipstream, something which Gasly said was worth 0.15 seconds. And once the race began on Sunday, Gasly did a brilliant job to keep his nose clean at the start, avoiding the spinning Valtteri Bottas ahead of him to emerge in 4th position through the safety car period and that first stint. He started to make a habit of doing exactly this, and that's holding his position when he qualifies well and essentially pulling himself into that no man's land just after the Red Bull and Mercedes cars. It's these kind of performances which makes you think that he deserves more from his Formula 1 career, and maybe even another opportunity to compete in a front-running team in the sport. Ferrari take 3rd in the standings. In the last few races, there is only one word which you could use to describe the Ferrari drivers, and that's consistent. Both drivers have been contributing to some excellent results for the team as they've ensured that they are at the front of the midfield in most of the races. The two drivers even swapped positions in an attempt to gain more points, with Carlos Sainz on fresher tyres, but this move shows just how similar these two drivers have been on track throughout this season, and in this race in particular. And yes, it did take some convincing to get Charles Leclerc to release the Spaniard, but ultimately it didn't make a difference in the end and they swapped back. Meanwhile, their Constructors' Championship rivals in McLaren have been anything but consistent, as they've been fighting for the lower points finishing positions, and today was no exception, with Norris dropping down the order following an engine penalty and only recovering to 10th, and Ricciardo losing out after his collision with Bottas, meaning both McLaren drivers were out of position. And Ferrari well and truly capitalised, with a P5 and P6 finish in Mexico, which allowed them to take that position in the standings with a gap of 13.5 points between the two teams as things stand now, following the 17-point swing in the race in Mexico. It was a great result for the team that have taken that position with just 4 races to go, and that position would mean a lot to these two teams given the difference in prize money. For me, this advantage has come from a few factors. I've already mentioned the consistency of their two drivers in the last few races, but their tactical choices of where and when to take the grid drops with the engine penalties has clearly been very strong as well. The race between the two teams is far from over though, as there are 4 races between Ferrari and 3rd in the championship. But given how strong they've been in the last few Grand Prix, they're probably the favourites to take that spot, and definitely deserve a green box following their performance today. Sergio Pérez, home hero. And it wouldn't be the Mexico City Grand Prix if I didn't highlight the brilliant drive from the Mexican driver on the grid, with Sergio Pérez driving excellently to really put the pressure on Lewis Hamilton in those closing stages. Ultimately, he wasn't able to get past the Mercedes driver, but he did a fantastic job to get behind him in the early stages and ensure the British driver was more worried about the Red Bull behind him as opposed to the Red Bull ahead of him. And it was this that was absolutely crucial for that team, so it's obviously a green box for the Mexican driver for his performance today. For the first time in his career, the Mexican driver has scored 3 podium finishes in a row, and what an excellent place for the driver to complete that hat-trick for the first time, as he ensured the home hero scored a great finish for that team. He was incredibly close in the closing stages as he got within DRS range of Lewis Hamilton, but it wasn't to be in the end. But still, we got to see the huge celebrations as the 130,000+ fans celebrated the first ever Mexican driver to achieve a podium finish. He was clearly a home hero, and that stadium section is one of the most iconic sections of racetrack on the F1 calendar. These performances in the last few Grand Prix from Perez in particular have brought the Red Bull team back into contention for the Constructors' Championship, and it really proves how valuable it is to have 2 versus 1 at the front in these races. So it was an excellent result and a dominant performance from Red Bull, who clearly had the fastest car today. It makes all those comments about Yuki Tsunoda pale into insignificance. Honourable Mentions. A few honourable mentions for today, the first of these being Sebastian Vettel, who had a very strong race weekend in Mexico for Aston Martin as he came home in 7th position. A great points haul considering the pace of that car right now. And then also, Kimi Raikkonen ended up 8th to overtake Nicholas Latifi in the championship order. It seems unlikely that Alfa Romeo will be able to overtake Williams in the Constructors' standings, but the Finnish driver is well and truly proving that he's still got it right up to his retirement at the end of this season. And then also, I want to give a shout out to Valtteri Bottas, a driver who really did have an excellent weekend, but luck didn't go his way today. He qualified on pole and did an excellent job on Saturday, but ultimately it didn't pay out for him in the end. We're well and truly on the home stretch now, with just 4 races to go in the championship. What did you think of the Mexican Grand Prix, and what did I miss? Make sure to let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.